Hey everyone, great to have you back. Thanks for tuning in today. We've got a fresh new story for you, so let's jump right in. The night was quiet. The road stretched endlessly ahead, and the soft hum of music filled the car. Lauren sat beside me, her face illuminated by the glow of her phone screen, scrolling mindlessly, humming along to the song playing on the radio. Everything felt normal, peaceful. It had been a long but good evening. One of those family gatherings that left you full, both from food and from the weight of small talk with relatives you only saw a few times a year. Lauren had seemed happy, laughing with my sister, sipping her wine as she played with my little nephew's hair. She had leaned into me when we sat together, her fingers grazing my arm absent-mindedly, like she always did. I hadn't noticed anything off about her. Not really. But then my phone vibrated. It wasn't unusual. I had a few work emails earlier in the night, even though I'd promised myself I wouldn't check them. Still, something about this vibration felt different. I glanced at the screen, barely paying attention, expecting it to be some spam notification. But the preview made my stomach drop. Your wife isn't who you think she is. My grip tightened on the wheel, my knuckles going white. A scam. A prank. Someone messing around. That was my first thought. It had to be. And yet, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that crawled up my spine. Lauren hadn't noticed. She was still lost in whatever she was looking at on her phone, her nails tapping idly against the screen. I exhaled slowly, glancing at the road before I tapped the message open. The first image was grainy but unmistakable. Lauren, in a dress she had always claimed to hate. A deep red satin thing I remembered seeing in her closet once, buried in the back, dismissed when I asked about it. She had said it didn't fit right, that she had only bought it on impulse but never wore it. Except here she was in that very dress, standing too close to a man I didn't recognize. His hand was resting lightly on her waist, and hers, hers, was placed over his chest in a way that made my stomach turn. I forced myself to swipe. The second image was clearer. Lauren, walking down a dimly lit hotel hallway, the man beside her. Their heads were close together, their steps in sync. The way her body leaned slightly toward him was *mate. Familiar. I swallowed hard, feeling my throat tighten, but I kept going. Then came the video, only 10 seconds long. Lauren, glancing over her shoulder, smiling. Lauren, laughing at something he said. Lauren, disappearing into a hotel room. A weight settled on my chest, crushing and cold. I turned my head slightly, careful, almost afraid to look at her now. She was still scrolling through her phone, her face calm, unreadable, humming softly to herself, completely unaware that my world had just cracked open beneath me. For a split second, I considered saying nothing, deleting the message, pretending I hadn't seen anything, that I hadn't just watched my wife step into a hotel room with a man I didn't know. But I couldn't. My hand clenched into a fist, my breath coming shallow and sharp. The music on the radio was still playing, some old song from the early 2000s that I had heard 1,000 times before, but now it felt warped, like it didn't belong in this moment. Lauren finally glanced up from her phone. You okay? You look tense. I forced a breath through my nose, keeping my voice steady. Fine. Just tired. She smiled, soft and knowing. Me too. And just like that, she went back to her phone. I stared at the road, my mind a blur. I needed to think. Needed to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. Confront her? Right here in the car? Would she deny it? Laugh it off? Make some excuse that would make me feel stupid for even questioning her? Or worse, would she tell me the truth? That thought scared me more than anything. Because if this was real, if these pictures, that video, were what they seemed to be, then it meant that the woman sitting next to me, the woman I had loved for years, the woman I had built my life with, was a stranger. And I had no idea what that meant for us. I gripped the wheel harder, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. The road stretched ahead, empty and dark, but I could barely focus on it now. My mind was somewhere else, trapped in that 10-second video, replaying over and over again like a broken record. Lauren's laughter, The way she glanced back at the man with a smile I had always thought was meant only for me. The door clicking shut behind her as she stepped into that room. I swallowed against the bile rising in my throat. Nothing would ever be the same after tonight. I knew that. I just didn't know what I was going to do about it yet. The silence between us felt different now, heavier, like something had shifted in the air without her even realizing it. She was still scrolling on her phone, completely unaware of the storm raging inside me. My pulse was hammering in my ears, drowning out the soft hum of the music. Couldn't look at her. Not yet. If I did, I wasn't sure what would happen. I kept my hands steady on the wheel, forcing myself to breathe evenly, to act normal. Normal? What a joke. Nothing about this moment was normal. Nothing about the last few minutes made any sense. My wife, the woman I trusted more than anyone, had just been handed to me in pieces, fragments of a life I didn't recognize, wrapped up in a few images and a 10-second video that told a story I never saw coming. The worst part was, I hadn't even questioned her. Not once. Not when she said she had a work dinner last week. Not when she came home late, smelling like a perfume I didn't recognize. Not even when she'd been more distant lately, her laughter coming just a little too easily, like she was forcing it. I had chalked it up to stress, to life, to all the little things that piled up in a marriage over time. I had been a fool. My knuckles ached from gripping the wheel too tightly, so I forced myself to loosen my hold, flexing my fingers against the leather. The car was still moving, the road still stretching ahead, but I wasn't really seeing it anymore. My mind was back in that hotel hallway, watching her disappear into that room, watching her make a choice she couldn't take back. I needed to hear it from her. I needed her to look me in the eye and say it. I veered off the highway at the next exit, pulling into a nearly empty parking lot beside a closed gas station. The streetlights buzzed faintly overhead, casting long shadows across the pavement. I put the car in park but didn't turn off the engine. Lauren looked up, frowning. "Why are we stopping?" I swallowed hard, staring at the windshield. I could feel her eyes on me, waiting for an answer, waiting for an explanation. My pulse roared in my ears, my chest tightening. I forced myself to turn my head, to finally meet her gaze. Her face was calm, open, completely unguarded. It made me sick. I pulled out my phone and held it up between us, the screen glowing in the dim light. I watched her eyes move to it, watched the way her expression shifted the second she saw what was on it. A flicker of something crossed her face. Recognition. Fear. A calculation happening in real time. Then, just as quickly, she exhaled sharply, rolled her eyes and leaned back in her seat. "Oh, come on," she scoffed. "You're seriously falling for that?" My stomach twisted. She wasn't panicked because she was innocent. She was panicked because she had been caught. I kept my voice steady, even though everything inside me was screaming. "Explain it." She let out a dry laugh, shaking her head. "It's fake, obviously. Someone's messing with you. Probably some scam or—" "Don't." My voice came out sharper than I intended, and she flinched slightly. "Don't sit there and lie to me. Not right now." For a moment, she just stared at me, her lips pressed together, like she was trying to decide how to play this. Then, finally, she sighed and turned her head, staring out the window. "It was a mistake," she muttered. "A mistake." The word hit me like a punch to the gut. A mistake was forgetting to turn off the oven. A mistake was missing a phone call. What I had seen wasn't a mistake. It was a decision. A choice. How long? My own voice barely sounded like mine. She hesitated. That hesitation was all the answer I needed. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that felt foreign in my own mouth. "Jesus, Lauren." She turned back to me, eyes flashing with something that almost looked like anger. "It wasn't—" She stopped herself, shaking her head. "It didn't mean anything." I felt something in me snap. I turned off the car, yanked the keys from the ignition, and shoved open the door, stepping out into the cold night air. I needed to breathe, needed space, needed something to stop the suffocating weight pressing down on my chest. A second later, I heard the passenger door open. Lauren got out, wrapping her arms around herself. Are you seriously making a big deal out of this? I turned to her slowly, barely able to believe what I was hearing. A big deal, she groaned, rubbing her temples. I knew this would happen. I knew you'd blow this up into something more than it is. I let out a breath, dragging a hand down my face. What exactly is it, then, Lauren? Because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty damn clear. She hesitated again. Then finally she shook her head. It was just one time. A stupid, meaningless mistake. I had too much to drink. I wasn't thinking straight. And I let out another sharp laugh, stepping back. One time? That's the story you're going with. Her jaw clenched. Because it's the truth. I pulled my phone out again, holding it up. So you just happened to have this dress lying around? The one you told me you hated? You just happened to end up in a hotel with a guy you barely know? Come on, Lauren. Do you really think I'm that stupid? She didn't answer. For the first time since this conversation started, her confidence wavered. That was when I knew. I turned back toward the car, yanking open the driver's side door. What are you doing? She asked, her voice edged with something close to panic. I didn't answer. Instead, I reached over, grabbed her purse, and tossed it toward her. It hit the pavement near her feet. Call someone, I said, my voice low, steady. You're not coming home with me. Her eyes widened. Are you serious? Dead serious. For the first time all night, real fear crossed her face. Not fear of what she had done, fear of losing control. She took a step toward me, her hands out. Babe, come on. Don't do this. We can talk about this. I got back into the car and slammed the door. Her hands pressed against the window, her voice rising. You're not actually leaving me here, are you? I stared straight ahead, heart pounding, hands gripping the wheel. Then, without another word, I started the engine. I drove away, watching her shrink in the rearview mirror, her silhouette bathed in the cold glow of the streetlights. And for the first time in years, my chest felt lighter. The tires hummed against the pavement, the cold night air pressing in through the cracked window. I could still hear her voice in my head, calling my name, her hands against the window, her eyes wide with something that almost looked like fear. But it wasn't fear of losing me. It was fear of losing control. Fear that, for the first time, I wasn't letting her dictate the conversation. I gripped the wheel tighter, trying to focus on the road ahead, but my mind was stuck in a loop. The images, the video, the way she had hesitated before answering me, how her words felt rehearsed, calculated, like she was picking the safest lie. One time, a mistake. She had clung to that story even when she knew I didn't believe it. My stomach twisted. I didn't know where I was driving. I just knew I couldn't go home. Not yet. The house felt tainted now, like every inch of it had been built on a foundation that was crumbling beneath my feet. I couldn't walk through the front door and pretend I hadn't seen what I had seen. Pretend that the bed we shared hadn't already been shared with someone else. A gas station appeared up ahead, its fluorescent lights flickering weakly against the darkness. I pulled in without thinking, parking beside one of the pumps but making no move to get out. The clock on the dashboard read 12:47 a.m. Felt later. It felt like a lifetime had passed since we left the party. Since I was just another husband in a car with his wife, oblivious to the cracks in his own life. I rubbed a hand over my face, exhaling slowly. My phone buzzed on the seat beside me. I didn't want to look at it. I already knew who it was. I grabbed it anyway, unlocking the screen to see her name staring back at me. 12 missed calls. 7 messages. Lauren, please answer. Lauren, I don't know where I'm supposed to go. Lauren, this isn't fair. You're not even letting me explain. Lauren, you're blowing this way out of proportion. Lauren, come back and talk to me. We can fix this. Lauren, you're really going to leave me stranded in the middle of nowhere? What the hell is wrong with you? The last message came in as I was reading. Lauren, if you don't come back right now, you'll regret this. I stared at the words, feeling something inside me go cold. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I love you. Not even an admission of guilt. Just manipulation. Just anger that I had dared to take control of the situation. I locked my phone and tossed it onto the passenger seat, my pulse thudding in my ears. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't heartbroken. She was mad that she'd been caught. A knock on my window nearly made me jump out of my skin. I turned quickly, my muscles tensing, but it wasn't Lauren. A guy stood outside, bundled up in a thick jacket, a cigarette dangling between his fingers. His face was weathered, maybe in his late 40s, his eyes tired. I rolled the window down an inch. Yeah. He took a drag, exhaling through his nose. You all right, man? I hesitated. Yeah. Fine. Didn't look like it. He gestured toward my dashboard. Been sitting here a while. I glanced at the clock. 1:06 a.m. Just thinking, I said. He nodded slowly, flicking ash onto the pavement. Thinking can be dangerous. Too much of it, anyway. I huffed a quiet laugh. Yeah. The man studied me for a moment, then let out a low sigh. Whatever's got you out here, it's either something you can fix or something you can't. I looked at him then, really looked at him. He wasn't just making conversation. He had that look in his eyes, the kind that only comes from experience, from standing at the same kind of crossroads I was at now. Yeah, I murmured. And what if it's something I can't fix? He took one last drag of his cigarette before flicking it onto the pavement, crushing it under his boot. Then you stop trying. With that, he gave me a small nod and walked back toward the gas station, disappearing through the door. I sat there for another few minutes, his words ringing in my head. Then I put the car in drive and pulled back onto the road. I didn't go home. Not yet. I pulled into the parking lot of an all-night diner. One of those places that hadn't changed in 50 years. The kind that always smelled like burnt coffee and grease no matter what time of day it was. The neon open sign buzzed faintly above the door, casting a red glow across the wet pavement. I stepped inside, the bell above the door jingling softly. A waitress glanced up from behind the counter, barely interested. A couple of truckers sat in a booth near the back, their voices low, a radio playing some old country song in the background. I slid into a booth by the window and stared at the menu without really seeing it. A few minutes later, the waitress appeared, pulling a pen from behind her ear. What'll it be? Just coffee. She nodded and disappeared behind the counter. I leaned back against the booth, rubbing my hands over my face. The exhaustion was starting to hit me now, the weight of everything settling into my bones. Lauren's words still echoed in my head. You'll regret this. I wasn't sure if she meant it as a threat or a promise. Either way, I wasn't going back. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. The waitress returned with my coffee, setting the cup down in front of me with a quiet clink. Need anything else? I shook my head. No, thanks. She lingered for a second, her gaze flicking over me like she was trying to figure out if she should ask whatever question was on her mind. Then she just nodded and walked away. I wrapped my hands around the cup, letting the heat seep into my fingers, grounding me. I had no idea what the hell I was going to do next. But I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let her make me feel like the bad guy. Not after everything she had done. The coffee was bitter, but I drank it anyway, staring out the window at the empty parking lot. The occasional car rolled by on the highway, headlights slicing through the darkness, but for the most part, the world felt still. It was almost peaceful, or at least it should have been, but my mind wouldn't slow down. My phone buzzed again. I ignored it. I already knew what I'd see if I looked. More texts, more missed calls, more attempts to pull me back in. Maybe she had changed tactics by now. Maybe she'd stopped being angry and started acting remorseful. Maybe she was sitting in some parking lot of her own, crying into her hands, telling herself that if I would just pick up the phone, she could fix this. But I didn't want her to fix this. I wanted her to feel it. I took another sip of coffee, barely tasting it anymore. My thoughts drifted back to the images, to the video, to the way she had hesitated when I asked if it had ever happened before. That hesitation haunted me more than anything else, because it meant that the answer was yes. I wasn't stupid. No one just accidentally ends up in a hotel with someone else. And the way she had acted, the way she had immediately tried to manipulate the situation, told me that she had experience doing this. It wasn't new. She had done this before. How many times? With how many people? Had I ever met them? Had I shaken their hands, shared drinks with them, laughed with them, all while they knew something I didn't? The thought made me grip my coffee cup harder, my jaw tightening. I forced myself to take a slow breath, pressing my fingers against my temples. Getting angry wouldn't change anything. I needed to focus on what came next. Leaving her on the side of the road had felt good. But it wasn't enough. That was temporary. She'd find a way back. She'd spin some story to make herself the victim. That was who she was. And the worst part was, people would believe her. Because I had believed her. For years, I had believed she was exactly who she pretended to be. I had trusted her, built my life around her. And she had been lying to me the entire time. I couldn't let her do that again. A plan started forming in the back of my mind, slow but steady, like pieces clicking into place. I needed to be smart about this. I needed to be careful. If I let her dictate how this ended, she would twist it in her favor. She would turn me into the villain, and herself into the woman who just made a mistake. I wouldn't let that happen. The bell above the diner door jingled, pulling me from my thoughts. I glanced up, expecting another late-night trucker or someone passing through. But instead, my stomach twisted. Dan. I had only seen his face once before, in the blurry images on my phone, but I knew it was him. Tall, well-dressed, sharp features. He looked exactly like the kind of guy who would go after another man's wife and not think twice about it. His eyes scanned the diner, and when they landed on me, he smirked. He knew who I was. Of course he did. I clenched my jaw as he walked toward my booth, sliding into the seat across from me like we were old friends. I didn't say anything. I just stared at him, waiting. He motioned toward the waitress. "Coffee, please." Then he turned his attention back to me. "I figured I'd find you here." My grip on the cup tightened. "How?" He leaned back in the seat, completely at ease. "Lauren." Of course. I should have known she'd go running to him. Maybe he was the backup plan. Maybe she had called him the second I left her behind, spinning some sob story about how I had overreacted, about how I had always been jealous, and never let her have any fun. And now he was here, testing me. "I have to admit," he said, smiling slightly, "I didn't think you had it in you." I frowned. "What the hell are you talking about?" He tilted his head, studying me like I was some kind of puzzle he was trying to solve. "I've seen guys in your position before. Usually they crumble, beg, try to win her back. But you just left." Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl, like he was impressed. I stayed silent. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. The waitress came back with his coffee, setting it down in front of him. He took a slow sip, watching me over the rim of the cup. Then finally he sighed and set it down. "All right, let's cut through the bullsh** tea." He laced his fingers together on the table. "Lauren's a liar. We both know that." I narrowed my eyes. "I believed her, too," he continued. "For a while, at least. She told me she was leaving you, that it was already over, that you were just dragging things out." My stomach twisted. He smirked. "Sound familiar?" I didn't answer. He chuckled, shaking his head. "Women like Lauren, they play the long game. They keep all their options open just in case. You weren't just her husband. You were her safety net." His words made my skin prickle, not because they were surprising, but because I knew they were true. "And let me guess," I said, my voice cold. "She was telling you that you were the only one." His smirk faltered slightly. For the first time since he sat down, he looked uncomfortable. I nodded slowly, understanding now. "You just found out, didn't you?" He didn't answer right away. Then, finally, he let out a bitter laugh. "Yeah, I just found out." So he wasn't here to gloat. He wasn't here to rub it in. He was here because he had been played, too. I should have felt some kind of satisfaction in that, but I didn't. "She's been seeing someone else," he admitted. "Probably for a while. I don't know who. But I know I'm not the only one." I stared at him, processing his words. Lauren had been juggling both of us. And now, according to Dan, maybe more. How far did it go? How many lies had she told? Dan took another sip of coffee, shaking his head. I don't know what she told you about me, but I didn't go looking for this. She made the first move, and I was stupid enough to believe her. I ran a hand down my face, exhaustion creeping in. I didn't care about Dan. I didn't care about his regret or his side of the story. He wasn't the problem. She was. So what now? I asked. He exhaled, staring at the coffee in front of him. Now? I walk away. That was the difference between us. Dan had nothing to lose. He could move on. Pretend this never happened. But me? I had to live with it. I had to untangle myself from her, from our life, from everything we had built. I had to make sure she didn't take anything else from me. I pushed my coffee away and stood up. Dan looked up at me, but I didn't say anything. I just tossed a few bills onto the table and walked out of the diner. I had work to do. The cold night air hit me as I stepped out of the diner, but I barely felt it. My mind was racing, pieces clicking into place faster than I could process. Lauren had been juggling both of us. And if Dan was right, maybe more. How long had this been going on? How many nights had she kissed me goodbye, told me she loved me, then gone straight into someone else's arms? I gritted my teeth, my fists clenching as I walked to my car. My phone buzzed again, and this time I pulled it out. Lauren. I let it ring. Then another message came through. Lauren, I don't know where you are, but I swear to God, if you don't talk to me, I'll make you regret it. There it was again. That same threat veiled behind desperation. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't even trying to be. I slid into the driver's seat, gripping the wheel as I exhaled through my nose. I had two choices. I could let her keep dictating how this ended, let her spin her story, let her decide how I looked in all of this. Or I could take control. I put the car in drive, the decision settling into my chest like iron. When I pulled up to the house, her car was already in the driveway. The lights inside were on. She was waiting. Good. I stepped out, my boots crunching against the gravel as I made my way to the front door. I could already hear her pacing inside. The second I opened the door, she was there. You ignored me, she snapped, her arms crossed. I've been calling you for hours. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me, but I didn't answer. She was dressed differently now. Sweatpants, one of my old hoodies, her hair pulled back like she had been crying. An act, a performance. Maybe she had even cried for real, but not because she felt guilty. No, it was because she had lost control. Where were you? She demanded, voice shaking. Who were you with? I tilted my head at her. You really want to ask me that? Her jaw tightened. You left me on the side of the road. I dropped my keys onto the table and met her gaze. I should have left you a long time ago. Her eyes flickered with something. Shock, anger, maybe fear. But then, just like before, she smoothed it over, slipping into the role of the wronged wife. This isn't fair, she whispered. You won't even hear me out. Hear you out. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Lauren, I saw the pictures. I saw the video. I know everything. Her breath caught, but she recovered quickly. It was one time. I shook my head. No, it wasn't. Silence. Her lips parted, but she didn't speak. Because she knew. She knew I saw through the lie. I talked to Dan, I said finally. The blood drained from her face. She took a step back, her hands shaking now, for real this time. You don't know what you're talking about. I stepped forward. So you weren't telling him you were leaving me? That it was already over between us? She swallowed hard. You weren't telling him he was the only one? She flinched. I laughed, but it wasn't funny. You had him fooled, too. And guess what, Lauren? He just found out the truth. That he was just another idiot in your little game. Her breathing turned shallow. I cut in. I don't want to hear it. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt nothing. She had taken every single moment, every memory, every piece of trust one had given her, and she had stomped on it. I wasn't going to let her cry her way out of this. She shook her head, desperation creeping into her voice. I love you, okay? I do. I messed up, but we can fix this. I exhaled, shaking my head. Lauren, you don't love me. You love having me. She took another step toward me, her hands out, pleading. Please, I can't lose you. You lost me the second you opened that hotel door. Tears spilled down her cheeks now, her face crumpling. Please, don't do this. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the envelope. The divorce papers. Her breath hitched. I set them on the table between us. You don't have a choice anymore. She stared at them like they were a death sentence. No. Yes. Her hands clenched into fists. You don't mean this. You're just angry. If you calm down, we can talk. This isn't anger. I interrupted, my voice steady. This is clarity. She asterisked in a sharp breath, shaking her head over and over. No, no, no. You're not doing this. I already did. I turned and walked past her, heading for the stairs. Her voice broke behind me. What do you want me to say? That I regret it? I do. That I was wrong? I know I was. But you don't just throw away a marriage over one mistake. I stopped at the base of the stairs and turned. One mistake. I repeated. Lauren, you threw this away. I'm just making it official. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I went upstairs without another word, leaving her standing there with the divorce papers still shaking in her hands. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence of the house. A house that had once felt warm, safe, full of love. Now it felt empty, a shell, a reminder of what I thought I had. By the time the sun rose, I had already packed a bag. I wasn't waiting around for her to figure out her next move. I wasn't giving her the chance to drag me into another fight, to manipulate me into staying. I walked downstairs, my bag slung over my shoulder. Lauren was still there, curled up on the couch, her eyes swollen from crying. She sat up when she saw me. Where are you going? I grabbed my keys from the table. Away from you. Her face twisted in pain, but I didn't stop. I walked to the door, pulling it open. Please, she whispered. Just don't leave me like this. I turned, looking at her one last time. You left me first. Then I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. And for the first time since this nightmare started, I felt free.